Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode of the podcast, our guests are Derek Sawyer and Chris Tanner. Derek Sawyer is the current chair of the board for the Kansas Wheat Commission. He farms and raises cattle in McPherson County, Kansas. Chris Tanner is president of the COG Board of Directors, the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers, and farms in Norton County. Chris also currently serves as secretary-treasurer on the board of the National Association of Wheat Growers. And we have Justin Gilpin, the CEO of Kansas Wheat, joining us on this episode. And we are going to talk about the year in review of 2025, recording this at the end of the year, and a lot of activities have happened in the wheat world, and we thought it'd be good to sit down with the leaders of both of our organizations and just kind of review the activities of both organizations, the issues on the table, and maybe take a look forward at what's coming up in the next calendar year. Derek, we'll start with you as chair of the Kansas Wheat Commission. Maybe take a minute or to review what the main goal is of the Wheat Commission with the wheat checkoff. And then we can talk about your farming year from the wheat perspective.
Right. Thanks for having me, Aaron. As you said, we have two different groups represented here with the Kansas Wheat Commission and the COG Board, which is the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. And it's important to realize the distinction between the two. And I'll let Chris discuss more of what he does. But from the Kansas Wheat Commission side, we literally are stewards of the checkoff dollars that farmers entrust our organization to take care of. We receive 2 cents out of each bushel of wheat that is sold throughout Kansas to fund the Wheat Commission, and we take that stewardship of that money very seriously. A lot of what we spend that money on is wheat research, and to break research down, we have a couple of the big building blocks of our research arm is our general wheat breeding program. We use some of the money for wheat production practices, and a lot of you have seen those seminars across the state, whether it's Romulo Lovato that's running those, Wheat RX program for producing a higher quality of wheat, and then finding alternative markets for wheat, both domestically and internationally. And so, we put a lot of money towards research. We are interested in domestic marketing of the wheat products that Kansas farmers produce, and then of course, international marketing and helping fund U.S. Wheat Associates who get out there and really get some of the trade deals done. And so to sum it all up, the Kansas Wheat Commission is out there to try and make wheat more profitable for the farmer. And we appreciate and really don't take it for granted the money, especially this time, the years like this where budgets are tight. We really appreciate farmers' donation through the checkoff to fund the activities of the Kansas Wheat Commission.
Well, that's a great summary there, Derek, and we'll come back to you on the farming year. And Chris, the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers actually predates the Kansas Wheat Commission. It was formed in 1952, the commission in 1957. And of course, COG is the membership organization where farmers can voluntarily be a member of that. So what sets that apart from the Kansas Wheat Commission?
Is what COG does that's different than the Wheat Commission is we advocate for farmers in Topeka and in Washington, D.C., kind of dealing with priorities and things to help tax policy, regulatory policy, transportation policy, basically making sure that Kansas wheat farmers aren't overburdened with regulation and have a strong voice in those places where policies are set.
And the boards meet regularly throughout the course of the year, both separately and together at joint meetings. And one of the things we do typically at the beginning of the meeting is go around and give crop reports. And so maybe let's do that on some case so you both hear from farmers around the table. But I kind of would like to get your unique perspective. Again, Derek, 2025 had a series of challenges for you where you are in central Kansas. In your record books, what's the wheat you're going to go down as?
Variability. We started off really dry, and then from the last week of May, really until this point, we have been extremely wet. The days to get farming done in the field have been limited. Wheat harvest took well over a month from the start to the finish, just from weather delays and being able to get into the field. We had a really good wheat harvest when it all came down to it. And really, we've had a really good fall harvest. I always say here in central Kansas, I lose more bushels to flooding than I do drought, just because we can rely on some irrigation. And so from the personal farm side, it's been a pretty difficult year, but we've made it, and we're looking forward to starting 2026.
And how's that look, having all that moisture, planting conditions this fall compared to previous years?
Yes, the planting conditions were probably the best we've had for a really long time in very short windows. We had about 3 different windows that we could get some things done. We utilized every minute that we could. We still did not get all of the wheat planted that we wanted to, which is kind of a common theme here across McPherson County in general, but central Kansas, I'd say, is going to be down. But you talk to people out west, western Kansas has the wheat looks tremendous, and they were able to get quite a bit of it in the ground. So we'll just have to see what comes of it next spring.
Well, Chris, what kind of variability did you have in your wheat crop year?
It was kind of a difficult year out here, too. We also started out very dry, and the rains kind of showed up about the time it was time to harvest wheat. And this is the first time in my farming career that half of the wheat was left in the field unharvested. It was short, a lot of it shattered out. The only wheat that was harvested out here was fallow wheat, because I'm far enough west that, we still run fallow in the operation. But the quality of what was harvested came in, pretty good. But yeah, kind of, once again, going back to, I've been farming since 1997. I've never left a crop in the field, and this year I left half of it there because it just wasn't worth harvesting yield-wise due to the dry start and the dry winter.
Do you feel better about the fall situation?
So we had really good planting conditions. We were a little bit later than normal just because it was too wet to get going. Wheat looks great right now. Good stands, it's up, tillered nice, and we're off to a really good start.
Well, let's bring Justin in here. And Justin, looking back statewide at the wheat crop now that we at the end of the year and have a lot of quality data in hand, and we've got a lot of market data in hand. How do you rank the Kansas wheat crop for 2025?
Well, Aaron, it's good to be with you and have our leaders on the podcast. The main reason I wanted to be on this podcast is I was really interested in hearing what our leaders had to say, and I'm here more as a listener than a participant, right? So I'm looking forward to learning from Chris and Derek. But they summed it up pretty well. When you look back on 2025, there's so many different things. Every year is different, and challenges and themes and storylines. But boy, 2025 from a wheat industry standpoint probably had as many of those as I can remember in recent history. If you think about transitions that took place at our national organizations, with Derek mentioned the domestic marketing and international marketing, and of course Chris involved with National Association Wheat Growers and policy. Policy probably is getting as much attention as anything. The new administration coming on and that first 100 days and all the attention agriculture's been getting. It's been a kind of a whirlwind, and Chris has been working with the NOG leadership as we've got Sam Kiefer, who's the new president of National Association of Wheat Growers and Wheat Foods Council from our domestic marketing standpoint, going through a transition that Kansas is really involved in, and then U.S. Wheat Associates with the retirement of Vince Peterson as the CEO of U.S. Wheat Associates with Mike Spear coming on board. Seen a lot of transition that happening in the face of these challenging trade winds that the whole wheat industry is dealing with. It was great that we had a better crop this year, right? Our last bushels per acre looks to be around 51 bushels per acre for the state of Kansas, just shy of 350 million bushel production coming off of those drought years. It's just really good to see farmers having bushels this year, even though we did have some major challenges right at harvest time on that central corridor, getting some of that crop out of the field. But from a profitability price standpoint, our exports have gotten off to a great start, got into markets that we maybe haven't been into in the last 10 years. And that's why we're off to an export pace with our exports probably the highest they've been in the last 12 or 13 years. But we are facing the challenge of there's big crops around the world. There just wasn't any major growing problems with wheat really anywhere in the world, where you've got record crop in Canada, record crop in Argentina, that in the southern hemisphere that's hitting the marketplace now, in Australia, near record crop. Of course, even with the disruption that have happened in the Black Sea, that wheat is still pretty aggressively being sold. That is pressuring our global prices. But as we look into 2026, we are going into a little bit slowdown for our exports, but our hope with conversations we've been having with U.S. Wheat Associates and overseas buyers that we can, in this marketing year, kind of pick up those exports again, hopefully this spring, and hopefully that'll help add to some of the challenges we're seeing at the farm gate level with where our prices are at. But overall, if I think back about 2025, just from a policy standpoint, trade standpoint, government shutdown standpoint, and transitions, it's been quite the whirlwind of a year, and we're fortunate to have our grower leaders that have participated in helping guide our organizations.
Chris and Derek, on trade, both of you get the opportunity throughout the course of a year to interact with some of our international customers. And Derek, I think you had a chance to do that a couple of times this summer. What's kind of the sentiment of the international buyer that you received this year?
I would say the international buyer really appreciates the quality and consistency of wheat coming from the United States. That's one thing we've heard over and over and over. And my experience comes from the South American market through U.S. Wheat Associates. I was able to travel over there 2 years ago and really present the wheat and the wheat quality that the U.S. had to offer as far as South American buyers. And so we met with 4 different countries in South America and really basically showed them what we had to offer for the upcoming year as far as importable wheat to them. And then when I've met with them since then, they continue with the same topics of quality and consistency of the U.S. wheat. And so that's a building block that we need to focus on going forward, that we can provide the quality and consistency that they need.
And Chris, we started the year, January of 2025, with a brand new president, a brand new administration, and things move fast. I think that would be an understatement. And Justin mentioned the government shutdown that came a little bit later on, but from your representative perk there at NOG and the international trade perspective and domestic policy, boy, it's just been a roller coaster, hasn't it?
It has, and to kind of highlight the differences of both organizations and how they work together, one thing that NOG and COG has been working on is, one of the things that came out of the gate with the administration was them doing away with the USAID, and we were active with getting Food for Peace, changed and continue shipping wheat out on that program, which I don't know that we have yet, but we're still actively pushing for that. Some more policy that we've been working on in trade is the run-up to the USMCA review and advocating for stable rules that supports trade and wheat exports. Another policy that we've been working on is the Snake River dams out in the PNW. Obviously, the big one kind of coming up that we're working on is the UP merger with the railroad system. So kind of making sure we, have the right political things in place so that we can trade for wheat farmers.
And we did get a farm bill in a kind of unconventional way this year. In the big, beautiful bill, the omnibus bill, most of the farm legislation was inserted in that bill, and then there's been some follow-up legislation after that. But as a whole, both of you, are you pretty pleased with the results of the new quote-unquote farm bill? Derek, we'll start with you.
As far as international marketing goes, basically the funds for being able to meet with potential buyers, to put on different programs to increase the awareness and the interest in wheat from the United States, basically that funding was doubled. And so now we're in the phase of accepting or putting in for different ideas on how to expose international trade. It really opened a lot of doors to being able to gain market access for United States wheat.
Chris, how about the farm bill?
The farm bill, in the one big, beautiful bill, a lot of things got pushed through, but we still obviously don't have a farm bill that's passed yet. And, we're looking for long-term certainty and getting that done. There's a lot of things that got passed in that are very advantageous for farmers. One of them, is tax certainty, where we're able to continue with the Section 199A tax exemptions. That'll help with farm tax policy. But I'm eager to get the Farm Bill finished up and passed in this next year, hopefully, just for certainty for moving forwards.
Yeah, as we're visiting here today, just recently announced the bridge payment to hopefully get us in, help out on some of the pressures we're seeing at the farm gate level for our growers to as we get into next year. But I know Derek and Chris had mentioned research and the production this year, but one of the things that we probably failed to touch on was this is probably a year that's really going to be looked back on as a pretty widespread disease event that impacted the state with wheat streak mosaic virus. And so Derek mentioned that research component where we've got some newer varieties that are going to help with that genetic resistance, but that communication and having a better understanding on how that disease works, because that was it was a year that it wasn't just a localized issue. In western Kansas, it spread all the way to I-35 and into parts of eastern Kansas this year. But, if you guys want to maybe just touch on a little bit on kind of what from that disease impact on this year's crop and some of the things that we need to be thinking about as organizations going forward to try to help out farmers from that standpoint.
We really saw wheat streak mosaic issues. Obviously, we've had them throughout the past, but widespread in central Kansas. This was the worst year to date, I'm going to say, that I know of in particular, that we've faced those type of disease issues in our growing wheat. It really made you think, really made you focus this fall when we're trying to burn down and get rid of volunteer wheat before we planted. I think it opened a lot of eyes as far as some holes that we had in our production practices. But when it comes down to it and what I see the future of the Kansas Wheat Commission and our research going forward, obviously Aaron Justin talked about new varieties coming forward. There is several varieties in the pipeline that will help with wheat streak mosaic and other disease issues. We're going to have to look. Obviously, the doors are starting to get kicked in with a genetically modified wheat, and that's using the HB4 trait coming out of Argentina, which doesn't have anything to do with disease resistance. It's more of a drought-tolerant variety. But with the future of genetically modified wheat, that is a big issue that we're going to be looking at with the Wheat Commission going forward. Our ears are always open to public interest. We know that there's some pushback from the world, in general. There's also a lot of huge opportunities for wheat farmers and wheat end users when it comes down to it to get a product that will go into their food, into their pet food, into other options that we have for wheat marketing. We're really going to have to look into this genetically modified issue going forward.
And Chris, I know back on the disease thing, it's sneaking into some parts of the state that typically don't see it. Northeast Kansas and even up in your part of extreme northwest Kansas, I know you told me there were some guys who didn't even recognize it. Kind of an emerging threat up in your area?
Oh, I think we're, through farm consolidation through the years and, some younger producers coming back, they thought they had Roundup drift, across their fields or something. And, we're just unaware of what wheat streak mosaic was. And, it gave them a quick education on being a better steward, trying to take care of things. But Derek highlighted, in what he said, some of the new varieties of wheat that are coming out really shined out here this year, having the wheat streak mosaic tolerance and trim V too. And the disease pressure came in, kind of late in the spring, which was kind of abnormal from what it usually does. So, but moving forward, it's obvious that we're going to have to, lean heavily on our wheat research at the Innovation Center and our breeding program to solve some of these problems, because I've never seen the pressure like what it was this year, and guys did a pretty good job last year of controlling their volunteers. So moving ahead with science and breeding is probably going to be the best way to combat this in the future.
Farming practices are changing. We're looking into more of a continuous no-till, double crop, something always growing on the ground situation. And so we talk about a green bridge and breaking the green bridge going from summertime into wheat planting. that situation here in the countryside is that window is not very big anymore. It just seems like we go back into wheat with soybeans, other cover crops. There's always something green for those little varmints to live in, and so it's becoming more of an issue to control that. And it's a lot of times nothing the farmer can do about it. It's just that your neighbor, you don't always match up farm-wise, growing season-wise with what your neighbor's doing. And so those little things move from field to field to field, and it's going to take technology and other practices that we aren't doing right now to try and control it.
And to throw in on top of that, cover cropping also adds into that, because Derek's point that, farming practices have changed. We're pushing harder and trying to do better for the environment and our soil. And, you throw cover crops out there and it's almost impossible to break a green bridge anymore.
We go around the table and do crop conditions, and we often hit on input costs and fertilizer costs. And I know in our last board meeting we talked about a lot of guys planting wheat this fall maybe didn't put some fertilizer on it. How does the input cost thing rank up there on challenges that you face, not just with wheat but across the board, Derek?
Oh, it's highly important. There's not anything that a farmer can do to control the national price of wheat. There's different marketing options and different markets that we can target to get a better price at the end. But the main driver of profitability is figuring out how to do it, how to grow that wheat for less money than what we receive in the end. And the input prices are huge. And so being able to be efficient with fertilizer use, chemical use, and be able to grow crops that still produce bushel-wise so that we can get paid in the end is challenging.
Chris, same thing in your neck of the woods, I would guess.
Yeah, a lot of guys haven't really put fertilizer out, and, I attribute some of that to market volatility. Even with the administration, you never know who's going to have a tariff this week or next week or not, and I think a lot of guys are just, waiting for a buying opportunity when it presents itself. But, looking back on my farming career, I can't. Usually when I put wheat in the ground in the fall, it's always been impossible to pencil a profit, but somehow it always finds out a way to work out. Out here where I farm, where it's a little more arid, having wheat and a crop rotation really helps the row crops and the profitability across the whole farm. And, as we look at that residue and stubble, in a complete farming cycle and an operation, wheat really shines as to the agronomic things it can do for your soil and long-term profitability with your other crops.
Justin, I know we've talked about in previous podcasts what Chris highlighted on trade volatility and tariff volatility, kind of where wheat's a little bit more stable, I would say, in trade compared to some of our other commodity brethrens in 2025. What do you see changing in the next couple of quarters going forward?
If I had to guess what things are going to look like in the next 3 to 6 months, I would say there's probably some surprises ahead, right? Some unknowns, right? And one of the bright spots of 2025, right, was the fact that we were able to sign those agreements with Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, and then to actually see the market following through with Bangladesh near over 500,000 tons that they've purchased of U.S. wheat already. To me, those are encouraging signs. Just to see those type of commitments. It wasn't government to government. It was actual industry representatives along with the associations that have signed those memorandum of agreements, but to see the industry follow through with some of those purchases have been really encouraging to see. And if we can maintain those relationships in an environment like this where there is a lot of bushels in the southern hemisphere with those large crops, I think that's something I'm encouraged to see, and something that I know we're going to be working with our overseas buyers to continue on, because that's what we need to do. We need those bushels moving. China's had so much focus on it, and from a wheat standpoint, China hasn't been a very good player in the world market. Certainly have not been a consistent buyer for wheat. We've seen where they've made big purchases and do cancellations. We've seen them not meet their TRQs, or we've seen them come in the market opportunistically when they can. And it's been a little bit different with the reliance when we're talking about other ag exports out of the United States with soybeans and sorghum, how they're very anxiously awaiting to see those Chinese purchases coming in and across the table, but I'm less optimistic just because we've seen how that's played out from the wheat standpoint over the last decade. So it's going to be really important that we, in mature markets, that we are continuing to find those new markets and not have that over-reliance one trading partner, especially one that hasn't necessarily been a good actor, good partner in trade relationships as we move forward to that big southern hemisphere crop. Aaron, coming on, one of the challenges that with that Argentina crop is that we're hearing early on that there may be some quality issues with that. And so will Brazil need to come in and get some more consistent protein and quality out of the United States, probably in the late winter or early spring? And so I know that's one thing that we're going to be working on and have some potential for some trade teams that are going to be coming up to Kansas and have those conversations. Nigeria back in the market strong, but with hard red winter wheat purchases this year. At one time in early October, Nigeria actually had surpassed Mexico as being our largest buyer. And so those are all encouraging signs. I think that we got to find a way in this political environment to make sure that we're building on those footholds that we're getting back into those marketplaces for the U.S. wheat industry and getting our Kansas bushels out the door.
Yeah, speaking of politics, Chris, you've got an exciting scenario. I think you're going through the officer rotation in NOG. You'll be moving up the chain side by side with our new NOG CEO, Sam Kiefer. And what excites you about that? What do you think's on the table as you move through the next 3 or 4 years?
You're absolutely right. Just kind of going through the hiring process and getting to know Sam. He has a pretty good ag background. He's worked as an ag lobbyist for pretty much his whole career. He's also a military veteran. The access that he has in D.C. with people, from what I've seen, especially with some of the MAHA stuff and things coming up, wheat's kind of at a transition point in my mind of, we're almost having to fight to prove that it's a, good ingredient component in our own country. And it's one of the most wholesome grains out there that's a staple in every diet. And being able to be a part of those conversations, I don't want to say standing up for wheat, because I don't think we have to. I don't think it's out there trying to harm anyone's health, but being able to, I guess, that's a difficult one to say. There's so many things on the horizon that are challenging in ag country right now, but new leadership in DC that's well connected in the town is excited to help push the wheat mission forward, I think, is what I'm excited about.
Derek, I think it's exciting, too, that one of your fellow commissioners, Gary Miller-Shasky from Lincoln, is going through the officer rotation on the U.S. wheat side almost at the same time as Chris. So we've got two Kansas leaders at the top of both those national organizations. That's a great thing.
It is, and it's about time. I mean, we look at Kansas and we're one of, if not the top wheat producing state year after year after year, and yet we just haven't had the leadership of these two organizations together, I don't believe ever, but it's really exciting to be able to look at the future of wheat and at a time when we need to be moving forward on some of these issues, to have the leadership in place to help do that on a national level, as well as both COG and Kansas Wheat Commission. We are not a lobbying political arm, but individually, I would say the ties and the interests that come from the delegation, both senators and representatives here in Kansas, is very strong, and being able to have communication with those representatives and then do it on a national level as well it's really neat for the future of wheat here in Kansas.
Justin, what's the New Year's resolution for the Kansas wheat organizations?
Well, that's a good question, Aaron. I know everybody expects me to say something about weight loss, but that's probably top front and center. Chris has kind of reminded me of that at the holiday party, actually. Thanks, Chris. But I think it's trying to maximize our opportunity for 2026. We know what the challenges that we all just touched on in 2025. And so how do we make sure that we're going to take that next step forward in 2026 when it comes to these, where there's challenges, find these opportunities with these trade relations to get our bushels moving. We got to maximize this opportunity that we have on the research front, the investment that farmers have made in the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center, our involvement, multiple, not just Kansas State University, but multiple breeding programs in the public programs in the Southern Plains, but then also several private companies that we're working with. How do we use 2026 to meet these changing transitions that are happening in the wheat industry, to take that next step forward to help put our growers in a better situation than how we're ending 2025? I think that would probably be how we're viewing it as a staff for these organizations around the office, as we think how we're going to hit the ground running in January.
And we'll give our leaders the last words here. And any final reflections for your fellow wheat farmers, Derek, on 2025 and what our organizations are going to do in the next year?
First of all, I want to say again, thank you to the wheat farmers for providing the support of the Kansas Wheat Commission. I want them to know that the money that ends up in Manhattan in their name is being used very wisely to really promote the future of Kansas wheat. It's been a difficult year, and we know the budgets are tight going forward, and so utilizing that money, we all know when you're looking at budgets for the next year, maintenance of equipment is not one that you try and cut very hard. We've got to maintain those relationships. We've got to maintain the programs that we're doing and really work our best to make wheat successful going forward. And as I look into 2026, and there's the future of the Wheat Commission, we're going to focus, and I mentioned it briefly before, and I hate to treat it like a hit and run victim here. Aaron, I know you're going to have a lot of podcasts going, I'm sure, in the future of the genetically modified traits and how it's going to fit into wheat production in Kansas. We're really going to have a focus on how we can utilize that technology, educate our consumers, and figure out a middle road into how to utilize those promising technologies. We've got to continue this expansion of wheat markets, both foreign and domestic, and looking at wheat as for food use, but also wheat using it in other markets, from aquaculture, pet foods. The gluten side has become popular again, believe it or not, and so looking at different ways that we can utilize wheat. And it all comes together into the overall discussion of profitability for the Kansas wheat farmer. Tired of hearing the term poverty grass. We've got a valuable product both to the consumer, and when we look at the value of growing wheat on our farms, whether it's in a rotation, using the stubble for no-till situations, we have a valuable product that I couldn't run my farm without using wheat in my rotation. And so we're really looking forward to the future and seeing how wheat can be involved in the Kansas farmers' hopefully productive and profitable 2026.
And Chris, you've got the final word, bud.
So to echo what Derek said, I do want to thank everyone out there for their membership to Kansas Association of Wheat Growers and the Commission, and all the funds that they put in there at their checkoff dollars. And I can say from the state level, those funds are not squandered. They are scrutinized and looked over and spent wisely. From a policy standpoint, I feel like we are at quite an opportunity right now, and I've had quite a few wins last year with getting reference prices increased and building a stronger safety net for farmers. Moving forward, obviously profitability is going to be a challenge, and we represent the best farmers in the world, and most of which are right here in Kansas because we're very diversified operations and we do a lot with a little. Moving forward into 2026, I'd heard this somewhere, but we're hoping to create a regulatory environment where family farms can thrive, not just survive. Looking forward to thriving in 2026 in the future, and hoping that we're putting policy wins in place so that family farms can do just that, thrive, and pass things on to the next generation.
Good wise words there, Chris. And Derek and Chris, thank you both. And folks need to realize all of our farmer volunteers are just that, volunteers, and they put in a lot of their time that they take away from their business. And these gentlemen do it willingly, and we appreciate it. So Derek and Chris, thanks for joining us. Thanks, Justin. And we will talk again down the road. Thank you to Kansas Wheat Commission Chair Derek Sawyer and COG President Chris Tanner for being my guest on this episode. If you have a follow-up question, please email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. You can always find previous episodes of Wheats on Your Mind at wheatsonyourmind.com or Apple or Spotify, and on the Kansas Wheat YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.